Hi, everyone. Let's get started. My name is Jess Neumann, and I am the Assistant Director of Academic Innovation here at DU. And I'd like to welcome you to today's workshop, Xplore workshop, How to Manage Your Event During a Crisis. Project X-ITE is the entrepreneurial hub at DU, and we support undergraduate and graduate students. Xplore supports students who have an idea or early stage company and want to validate their idea or continue growing an established venture. The program helps students to be successful, whether they continue with their current venture, start a new venture, or become innovators within another company. As I just mentioned, today's workshop topic is how to manage your event during a crisis with DU alumna Lara Smedley. This workshop is part of Project X-ITE's Xplore Incubator program, and in response to COVID-19 and the crisis, we are opening our virtual workshops to the public for free. Our presenter, Lara, has over a decade of sports marketing and event production experience. She began Smedley Events in 2018, and her passion for creating memorable experiences for event attendees, coupled with meeting the strategic goals of corporations, brands, and nonprofit organizations, is at the core of what drives Smedley Events' success. So before we get started, just a few logistics. Feel free to ask questions via the Zoom chat function, and we are recording today's session if anyone needs to drop off early. So on that note, I'm going to toss it over to Lara. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jess. Let me just share my screen real quick, and then I will get started here. Okay. So as Jess just mentioned, my name is Lara Smedley. I graduated from the University of Denver in 2007. From there, I worked for professional sports teams in both the NBA and college football. So my background is pretty heavy in terms of fast-paced, ever-evolving environments. So I hope that gives me a little bit of insight into how to deal with events during a time where things are changing all of the time, which is what we are experiencing today. So a lot of what I do is I focus on the strategy and purpose behind events. So kind of today what we'll go through and talk about is how you make that decision about whether you are going to postpone your event or if you're going to go virtual. We'll dive a little bit deeper into the process of taking an event virtual. I am of the belief that it is not just about flipping a switch and getting a Zoom link together and producing your event this same way you would have done if you were to have it in person. I think it's really important to be thoughtful and intentional about how you're putting your events together to make sure that you're providing the value that you want to provide with your event. I will then also talk about a couple communication strategies related to postponing an event if you decide that that is the best way for you to move forward with your event. Feel free to ask questions in the chat. I have it here up, so I will do my best to be responsive right away when you ask a question, or I will find a time to bring that back in or answer it later for you. I'm on the right, there we go. Okay, so the question that we have today is, do you go virtual with the event that you have planned or an event that you are wanting to plan, or do you postpone? And kind of I've broken it down into three areas. The first is purpose. So what is the purpose behind the event that you want to do? You need to determine what your goals are. Is your event meant to build community? Is it meant to drive traffic? And right now we're talking about virtual traffic. So traffic to a website or a blog or a Facebook page or a Facebook group. Do you want to provide entertainment? There's a lot of examples out there right now of folks that are doing really great things in the virtual world by providing just pure entertainment? Or do you want to, generate some revenue? We all have to pay bills and figure out ways to sustain our livelihood. So it's completely appropriate to want to produce an event and do that virtually. That is a way to provide some income for yourself right now. And then also thinking about who your audience is. We'll have some different examples throughout the presentation that gives you an idea of why it's so important to know who your audience is before you even start really the planning and logistics of your event. One other thing to think about when you're deciding if your event should go virtual or postpone is really thinking about what are the trade-offs that you're going to be giving up from taking your event from an in-person event to a virtual event. So think about things that you experience when you're at an in-person event. Those are sensory experiences, right? So I do a lot of farm-to-table dinners. Well, it's a little difficult to have those experiences when you can't actually be in front of people and having that ability to taste and smell something and share that with a collective group of people. So that would be a trade-off that you would be giving up if you went from a in-person event to a virtual event. Personal connections, that's a lot of what people are looking for when they gather together, is to build those personal connections and those relationships. So that is a trade-off, and doesn't mean that you can't have a connected event by going virtual. It just means you need to be very intentional about the decisions you're making and about the tools that you're using to be able to cultivate that connection opportunity for your attendees. And then another is vendor participation. I work with a lot of different people to produce events. There really is not a single event that I do where I'm the only hands that touch it. So if you're deciding to go virtual, sometimes those trade-offs mean that you aren't going to use all of the vendors that you've used before. So that might be catering or decor or DJs or anything else. So finding ways to really understand how that adds value to your event and making sure that you just take into account all of these trade-offs you potentially are going to have to make if you go from a in-person event to a virtual event. And then finally, to me, the most important element is value. So deciding if you're going to host an event during this time is really important to understand what is the value that you're providing your attendees or your community, and really making sure that you're hosting an event or putting on an event that is not being insensitive to what everybody is going through right now. There's a lot of hardship. There's a lot of people that are just trying to figure out what they're going to do next, or what they're going to do during this time where maybe their business or their organization has been shut down and they can't work in the same way. So just being very intentional about, I want to produce an event and I want it to have some type of value for a certain group of people. So we'll talk about virtual first. So there are lots of different ways that you can host virtual events, and maybe your event plan before was maybe something different. It could have been a networking event, it could have been a luncheon, or it could have been a happy hour or a golf tournament. You can still, if you go back to the goals and the purpose behind your event, you can still meet those goals and have that return and shift what the type of event that you are doing. So don't feel like you have to be so rigid that if your previous event was a wine tasting, that the only way that you can still reach your goal is by doing a wine tasting and just changing it to a virtual event. Maybe that wine tasting could now shift to a tutorial about different types of regions of wines, or maybe it could be some type of a tour behind the scenes access of a winery that you would be able to have access to get to during this time. So event types are how-to tutorials, training classes, courses. I've seen a ton of businesses doing really great behind the scenes tours and access. A lot of the museums are doing a really great job of this, where they're giving people virtual tours of their museums. The goal here is that once everything is opened back up, that people would have given that chance to get a little glimpse at what they do. And then when they're able to go, they're going to be even more excited to get to that museum or to get to that place where they got a small glimpse of access or behind the scenes. Interviews and storytelling are really great right now, especially in times where people want to be lifted up and they want to hear great stories. Conferences and meetings, concerts, performances, those are happening everywhere. Networking and social gatherings, and then also fundraisers. The one thing about fundraisers I just want everybody to be conscious and aware of is just making sure that there are needs that are really important right now for people. There will be a time when any fundraiser will be able to come back and they'll be able to raise money for whatever cause that they want. But for now, being very conscious that a lot of funds and energy are going towards fighting COVID and being able to have the resources that we all need so that everybody can go back to some form of normalcy of how life was before. So, technology. There are a lot of options for people to use for virtual events. Probably more options than you would be able to spend time researching. So here I've just listed a few to give you a highlight, but I would say that before you decide which option is best for your event or your organization, to really do your due diligence. And that's part of the planning stages and writing out your goals and the purpose behind your event, as well as your audience. So traditional video conferencing, Zoom, Google Hangout, all social media platforms can be used for virtual events. You can do either pre-recorded types of events, or you can even do live streams. There are video subscription services. So if you're looking to create an event that is long-standing, where you're going to have multiple types of content that's going out to kind of generate interest, subscription video services like Intel Video are great. If you are wanting to produce a larger scale event and maybe you want more interactivity or more tools than Zoom or Google Hangout is going to provide, Crowdcast, On24, Run the World, Hopin, Event Farm Virtual, those are all options that you can look into for some of those more large scale if you're trying to maybe recreate or produce a bigger conference or a meeting that you now need to go virtual on. There are some pretty interesting interactive virtual event tools. Tihu and vFairs are two that I've heard of that are avatar based. So you really could have some interesting experiences where people can recreate conferences as if they were in attendance in person at the event. And then there are tools that really need to provide more customization. So there is a local company that I've worked with before called Fastlane Productions, and they have on the fly adapted to the new virtual world, and they are producing customized video conference and telecommunication systems for a variety of people. So universities, high schools that are trying to figure out how to do graduations and commencement, they're working with teams to figure that out. So if you are looking for something that is more customized to your organization or your business, I would recommend Fastlane Productions. My one note on technology, it is really unfortunate, some things that are happening out there right now with hackers. I think some people are calling it Zoom bombing, but it is basically where people are getting a hold of access to virtual meetings or virtual events, and they're coming in and they're disrupting them. I experienced this personally on Monday night. I was on a Zoom call with a networking group, and we had somebody, it seemed like multiple people come in, and it was just very disruptive and offensive. So whatever you do, just make sure that you're protecting your virtual event. For Zoom, for example, don't ever post your Zoom link on social media as an open event. I highly recommend that people create RSVP systems so that they can really track who is attending their event. But then also, if something does happen and you have to close out that virtual event quickly, you have the ability to either communicate to your audience or to, on the fly, if you're able, send them out a new Zoom link that has a password and get that meeting started back up right away. But if you're not prepared and aware of what could happen, that's where you're going to run into some problems where technology is going to hurt you rather than help you. So marketing your event, this can apply for both in person and virtual, but I think there's some specifics in terms of virtual to really take into account as you're marketing your virtual event. So regardless of what you do, having a very clear message is important. Making sure that the value of your event is present in all of the copy and the images that you're using to promote the event. As I just talked about, having some type of RSVP I believe is really important. One, if you're hosting events where maybe they're going to be repeat events, or you're going to have some type of event that later on that same audience could be interested in, you want to start to build that database of people. And obviously make sure that you're getting their permission to keep them on some type of email list, but making sure that you are getting your attendees information so that you can provide them more information about what you're doing in the future. The other thing that I see that really drives me crazy is when people want to do an event, and again, this can be in person or virtual, and they're promoting it, but it's completely difficult to figure out how to either share the event, so making it really accessible on social media just to share, or what really drives me crazy is when they don't have calendar integrations. For myself, I live off of my calendar. So if I sign up to go to a webinar or to check something out, if it doesn't have the ability for me to kind of download that into my calendar, I'm probably going to forget, or I may not spend the time to manually enter it into my calendar and save that information. So making sure that you're using tools that are easily integrated into other platforms is really important. And then also not being scared of promoting your events in multiple channels. So if your event is living off of Eventbrite, for example, which is a really easy tool, free for the most part. If you're hosting a free event, there's no cost to set up your event on Eventbrite. And use Eventbrite as the ticketing tool. And they have a really great calendar and shareable features that allow for your event to kind of get to as many people as possible, but also create a Facebook event. Share it on all of your social media channels. Share it on any email newsletters that you have. Another great thing is if your event is co-hosted by multiple people, or if you have partners or sponsors that are associated with your event, make sure that you're giving them the marketing tools to be able to promote your event for you, whether that's speaker cards, or if it's sponsor information. So saying, you know, this event sponsored by XYZ, putting their logo on it, giving them some extra marketing and promotional materials will be super important. Another pro tip for you is, and this probably leans towards more traditional events prior to COVID, but registrations tend to spike 2 to 3 weeks before an event. So when you're talking about marketing your virtual event, just making sure that you're amping up your marketing at certain times so that you're really getting in front of people at the time that they're actually committing to do things. And in the virtual world, a lot of people will RSVP to events and then not show up. So really making sure that you understand what your capacities are, or what your desired capacity is based on what your event type is. Accessibility and inclusion. So this is something that is really important to me. I think that making sure that your events are able to reach anybody is important, regardless of any type of exclusionary factors. So the way that you can make your events more accessible and inclusive, first is by just making sure that all of your pre-event communication is very clear and has any questions that people might have either answered in that, or the ability for them to reach out to you to get any answer. Making sure those emails are descriptive and they have any information about technical support. So in relation to virtual events or virtual meetings, it's not always easy, especially if you're dealing with audiences that maybe aren't as familiar with technology or with platforms like Zoom or Google Hangouts, especially if you're going to use a customized platform, making sure that you have any information that would allow for your participants to troubleshoot if they did have problems. That eliminates barriers for people to drop off or not attend your virtual event. Another important thing is clean presentation, making sure that all of your slides or anything that you're using within your virtual event is just clean, easy to read, doesn't have a lot of extra information that is not pertinent or important to them. Okay, so we just got a question about visual impairments and screen readers. That is actually part of the audio and video assistance. So there are some platforms, I believe VFairs does it. I haven't tried to research to see if Zoom has it, but they should have some closed captioning features where you can make sure that those are turned on. So that would be one thing that I would ask in your pre-event communication, is if you have anybody that has any special assistance needs. So if you had somebody that was hearing impaired, making sure that you have closed captioning. If you have somebody who has any other impairments or can't get the resources that they need to be able to participate. You just want to make sure that you can provide those. And here's the, you don't know if you don't ask. So making sure that pre-event communication has all of that information so that you are accessible to anybody. Excuse me. So the last piece is diversity. I think it's really important that people, when you're thinking about your audience, making, excuse me, making sure that you're giving everybody the opportunity to participate and everybody the opportunity to feel like they're included. And sometimes that means making sure that your panelists or making sure that your artist, if you have some type of a concert, are very diverse. And that means in everything. That means in male and female. That means in race. That means in ethnicity. This is the time to be very intentional about what you're doing. If you have a little bit more time to work on your event, step outside your comfort zone, step outside the box of what you traditionally have as speakers or performers or anybody who would be a part of your virtual event, and reach out to somebody new, get them involved, get a different perspective, get a different point of view. This is a time where you have the opportunity to do a lot of really great PR for your organization or your business. And paying attention to your accessibility and your inclusion now will pay tenfold later when you start to do events in person again. So just be thoughtful, be intentional, pay attention to other people's needs as you're planning your event, because the thing about virtual is you can't see them. You can't necessarily, especially in this case where we're on a webinar where I can't see any of you, thinking about ways where you can take down barriers and where you can make events more open and friendly for anybody to participate. I promise there will be no kickback on that once you're able to have an in-person event again. Your in-person events will be better, they will be more rich, and they will be more meaningful after, if you're paying attention to accessibility and inclusion now. The other part about virtual events that I think people struggle with is engagement. So just like right now, I'm the only one talking, which is not always the best thing. I think it's much better to have a dialogue, which is back and forth conversation. But for the purpose of this workshop, this is what works best. But there are ways that you can create engagement with virtual events. So for example, at the beginning of this call, you guys had the opportunity to participate in a poll. You can do that throughout a presentation if you're doing some type of workshop. If you're an artist, or if you have an artist that you're wanting to do a virtual event with, you can do requests or suggestions for songs. There's Q&A. We have Q&A up, so if people have questions, please feel free to ask them. You can have people submit information. If it's an event that maybe is living on Facebook, asking them to submit photos or other content that then can be a part of your virtual event. People will be more invested in what you're doing if they get to participate. So not thinking about virtual events just as a one-way conversation where it's somebody teaching or talking, really thinking about a virtual event as still that in-person connection and that community that you want to build. Make sure that you're finding ways to do that virtually through different engagements. The last thing related to how you really want to put on or think about your virtual event, and this applies to in-person events as well, but making sure that you're following up. So whether that is a thank you email after the event is over, making sure that if you have the opportunity, you're asking for feedback. So you're either preparing a survey or just asking for open-ended feedback after an event. You will only get better the more that you receive and are able to utilize feedback. So just because it's virtual and just because you weren't in a room with somebody doesn't mean that you shouldn't follow up with them after and thank them for participating and ask them for follow-up or ask them for feedback based on their participation in your virtual event. So I'll give you guys a couple examples of some virtual events that I think are successful and productive right now. Verizon is doing a virtual or live stream concert every Tuesday and Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern, which would be 6 p.m. Mountain Time. They are doing this, so the value for them is they are just getting Verizon in front of more people. The value to the community is that's actually part of a fundraising effort that they're doing with the LISC. So it's a nonprofit that will use funds that Verizon is donating to them to write grants to businesses that are being affected by COVID. So this has multiple positives for the community, and it's a really great PR effort for Verizon. This is an example of a virtual event that I did. This is on a smaller scale, so it's difficult for people to say, yeah, it's great for Verizon. They have lots of dollars and they have access to really high-end talent and celebrities that are going to participate, but anybody can do a virtual event on any scale. So I'm a part of a women's networking group in town, and we host monthly socials. So typically those socials are all in person, whether they be like a game night or a wine tasting, anything, it's all in person. Well, when COVID hit, we had to cancel our next in-person event. But I just felt like we were losing out on an opportunity to support our members of this organization. So we created a virtual social. Everything happened and lived within Facebook. So it wasn't a video conference or a phone call. I sent out information where all members of this organization could submit one product or service that they wanted to feature. So then during the event, we actually posted within the Facebook event the members' product or feature of their business, and then people engaged. So they liked, they commented, they asked questions, they followed up with the different members in the organization so that they could build relationships with people. And then the most important thing was so that they can support others. During this time where a lot of businesses are really impacted by COVID, this was important to be able to have that community where people could lean on each other for support. So this is a type of virtual event that any organization or any community could replicate. Rocky Mountain Virtual Music Festival. So this is maybe a Verizon Pay It Forward like type of an event, but this is local. So there's a group in town that every Friday night they're live streaming music on Facebook, and they're also featuring artists. So again, this is all virtual. This came out of COVID, and the music industry obviously is impacted heavily because they're also 100% based off of live performances and in-person events. So musicians, basically their income stream has been completely cut off. So during the virtual music festival, people can watch it for free, but they do have different prompts where people can actually tip the musicians or send them money. This really helps some of these musicians sustain their livelihood. So it's every Friday. They have a Facebook page, so if somebody is finding the Facebook, there we go, they can post it. So these are all examples of virtual events that anybody can participate in, but then anybody could try to replicate with their community of people, whether that is a school organization or a nonprofit or neighborhoods. If just your neighbors want to participate in something, you can recreate some of these experiences. So I'll go over postponement as well. And if you make the decision that virtual is just not for your event, that's totally fine. I have several events that I won't do virtually. The trade-offs that I talked about before just aren't worth it for me to take these events virtual. So they are being postponed. So I have just 4 kind of quick hits on what to think about when you are getting ready to postpone your event. And kind of for me, the big main thing I'm focusing on when it comes to postponement is patience. Because right now we are all in a very uncertain time. We don't know what's happening or when things are going to change. So patience is so important. Patience and being prepared. So the first part is, really to prepare for your postponement. So that means if you have the ability to set a new date far enough in advance right now, then do that. Set the date, make sure that all of your logistics are being coordinated, and making sure that whatever would affect a date change, you have ready and you're prepared to deal with. And a thing on dates, a lot of people are asking me, if I postpone my event, when should I host it? Or when do you think we'll be able to have events again? It's a really hard thing to kind of forecast at the moment, unfortunately. I've had lots of talks. I work with nonprofits a lot, so I've had lots of talks with different nonprofits, places like the Children's Museum, I've heard are not planning on opening until July 1, and that's just based on the information they have today. So that could change at any time. Once we're kind of out of the stay-at-home order, the big thing to think about is there's a lot of fear associated with COVID, and you can host an event, but people may not come yet. People have to feel comfortable with gathering in groups again. So really thinking about the size of your event first, and then kind of figuring out, okay, based on the size of our event, when do we think that it's appropriate to have this again? I am not the expert, or I don't have a crystal ball on this, but I've basically been telling people that, mid-summer, small to medium-sized events will probably be appropriate. And again, this is based on if we are coming out of stay-at-home in the current timeline that is laid out for us. And then large gatherings, bigger festivals and concerts, it may be end of summer, early fall until those are really coming back online. So just being conscious and realizing that this just isn't about life going back to normal. This is about people's lives and people's comfort level with being in public spaces. And if you're going to host an event sooner rather than later, after this is kind of all settled and businesses are opening and events are starting to happen, I really would challenge you to think about how are you going to communicate that your event and your space that you're holding your event are safe for people to come to, but then you're also taking all of the precautions to make sure that people are safe while they're there. So, more hand washing stations, more hand sanitizer out. A great example is I did an event at the end of last year at a movie theater. And we hired some talent that were coming for photo ops because it was a Star Wars premiere. And the movie theater said we couldn't have anybody that had a mask as the talent that were coming, which I can completely understand and I appreciate. So we followed that rule. Well, guess what? Like, people are going to be wearing masks. So what are movie theaters going to do? What are other businesses going to do to accommodate for some potential changes that are going to stick around for a while? So those are just things to think about when you are preparing to postpone your event and potentially figuring out when a new date would be for that postponement. Communication is really important when you start to postpone events. You want to make sure that you're communicating to both your internal whether it is your vendors or internal partners or sponsors, making sure you're communicating everything to them. And then also communicating that externally. I have one example right now. I produce a festival in Fort Collins, and we have postponed that event. It was supposed to take place at the end of May, but a couple weeks ago, we decided that there was no way that that was possible, and that we were going to postpone till the end of August. So we have communicated everything to all of our internal people so far. So all of our exhibitors and our sponsors and the musicians, all of the logistics, so our AV companies, our staging company, they all have the new date. But we are holding off on kind of publicly pushing out new information about the event because we want to be very conscious and aware of what people are dealing with right now. So people are dealing with, again, things that are needs, things that are of vital importance to their life, making sure that they can provide for their family. They don't really need to hear from the Poudre River Fest about our new date in August now. So we can hold off on our external communication for a few more weeks until we feel like people are have a better handle on how they're moving forward with their life since COVID started. So just, again, being intentional about how you're communicating these new dates and new changes about your event to people, and then also being flexible. When you change a date for an event, you might have some folks that doesn't work for them anymore. So really, if it's a paid ticketed event, making sure that before you communicate to your ticket buyers that you have decided what your exchange or refund policy will be. And really, again, being compassionate about people's situations and understanding that we're all in this. Everybody is losing money in some form or fashion. And so not having a good refund policy is probably not the greatest PR move. So as you're thinking about your communication and what you're going to do with a postpone event, really thinking about others first is important. Another piece for postponement that I am talking to a lot of people about is really monitoring new protocol that may happen. So I mentioned movie theaters and masks. It'll be an interesting thing to watch when movie theaters open back up, if they'll allow people to wear masks, because that currently is not part of their approved protocol. When it comes to events, really thinking about, okay, we don't know if this 6 feet rule will go away right away. So laying out your event, how is your event being laid out where people can still attend, participate, move around, but still have that extra buffer space that they feel comfortable with right now? I've heard talks about theater companies really figuring out, could they open back up with some type of new social distancing order? So does that mean you only sell every 6 seat to try to help people have that space that they want? I mean, because we've all been to a sold out show and you're standing, shoulder to shoulder with somebody. So it's really important, if you decide to postpone your event, not just to think, okay, I can just change the date, press pause, and then wait to, have my event in a few months, making sure that you're paying attention to what's going on, and seeing, okay, what are some protocols that are coming out? Talking to people in your community, talking to people in your group or your industry, and figuring out what you can do together to make people feel more comfortable about gathering back in, different spaces for events. The last piece for patiently postponing is really, this is an opportunity for event organizers to get innovative. We all have a little, in my case, we all have a little extra time on our hands. And so think about your event and what your goals and what your purpose and the mission is behind the events that you're doing, and find ways to really integrate those goals into the experience that your guests are having at your event. You want people, an event is, I like to say an event is not just a pretty party anymore. Events are really about connection. Events are about like driving revenue, if that is part of your goal. So how are you doing that? And how are you doing that in a new and creative way? Sometimes that might mean how are you doing it in a new and creative way with less of a budget, because budgets are getting hit hard every single day by different organizations and different businesses. So you might have to get creative in that way. It doesn't mean you're just going to get really creative and go spend a bunch of money on some cool decor, but spend the time, do research, check out other events and see what they're doing. But being innovative right now, again, is going to pay off tenfold when you start to get back up to having your events in person. So that is my presentation for you guys. I think it's a difficult time to be in right now, but I believe, and why I started a business, excuse me, centered around events, was that I believe events are the thing that can bring us all together. And it's really important for us not to forget that during times of hardship. The picture on the screen right now is an event that I do actually at my home in Centennial. And a small example of not the same level of crisis, but a normal event crisis was it started to rain this day for this event. So it's an outdoor farm to table dinner. And as guests were arriving, it started raining. And obviously, as you can see in this picture, I don't have a tent over the tables. So we just had to call an audible, and we put everybody underneath the tents that are on the left of the picture. And we decided to have our first course standing up. And so our servers passed around, it was a Brussels sprouts course. And we passed around the plates and forks, and everybody was standing and talking and eating, and rain was coming down around them. And then all of a sudden it magically stopped. And guests started walking out and going back to their table. And myself and my team were furiously drying off all the seats and the tables so people can sit back down. And then the next thing I knew, I looked up and there was a rainbow. So if there's anything that we can all take from this, like there are going to be really awful things that happen. But there are opportunities if you're prepared and you are agile, and you're able to make those pivots and those shifts. You can have a rainbow at your event, and you can, next thing you know, it can be a beautiful experience. So feel free, here's my email address. You guys, anybody can email me if you have any questions at any time. I'm happy to answer them. You can connect with me through my business on Facebook and Instagram, or personally on LinkedIn. So that is all. Thank you. If you have any questions, we still have a couple of minutes. But let people share. It wasn't clear how that worked. Yeah, so for the Polka Dot Powerhouse event, we created a Facebook event. So just how you normally create an event on Facebook. Then I sent an email to the membership, so all the members of the Polka Dot Powerhouse. There was a Google form where they could submit information about their business, as well as photos. Then I curated all of those submissions into posts that I put within the Facebook event. So it kind of was like, the best way I could explain it was speed dating. So it was speed dating on a Facebook event. And I actually, what I'll do, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, hopefully. And then I'll send in the chat box, I will send you guys the actual link to the Facebook event. And then you can go back and see it, and you can see how the interaction was. So people liked and commented on each post that I was putting within that Facebook event. And then people were able to follow up. So if somebody was posting about their makeup line that they have, Sally could follow up with her and get more information on their own and sell them product, or they can follow up on anything. So I will post that in here in just a second. Any other questions? It's very hard to do this when you feel like you're just talking to yourself, just so everybody knows. Okay. Well, I'm glad it was interesting for Kristen, at least. And the good thing about Facebook events, just so that everybody knows, I don't know if Facebook ever removes them. So for example, I just posted the Facebook link to that Polka Dot Powerhouse event that we did. You can still look at it on Facebook. So it's not a, you know, it was a public event, so people could still come in. I guess technically we probably could have had somebody hack it or bomb it. But you can change on Facebook events, you can change posting permission. So you could do it where just the moderator, in this case, the moderator was myself, could do all of the posting. And so then everybody else was just viewing. And if you go to that Facebook event, make sure you click on the discussion versus the about, because the discussion will show you all the posts that happened within the Facebook event. And again, the goal is this is a community of women, mostly business owners, and they just wanted to provide a platform to support each other. So it didn't necessarily mean we were all selling something, but we were sharing something about our business or who we were so that people could get more information about it. Does anybody have an event that they're working on that they have a specific question about?
Hey Lara, this is Kanita. So I actually do have a question about a virtual pitch event that we are having with Project X-ITE, where we have about 12 students who will be pitching 5 minutes each, and then judges will then ask them questions. Do you have any suggestions about how to effectively run an event that has multiple people who are lined up to speak, and then others who will then raise their hand? Like, how do you help that run smoothly?
So is there a need for the pitches to be live, or could the pitches themselves be pre-recorded?
That's a good question.
The judging portion is live, and you could still have your pitchees, I don't know what the right term for that is, but they could still be present, but like their pitch portion is pre-recorded. So you know it's like a 2-minute pitch, they do it, and then there's the feedback session where you have everybody that maybe is coming into the call as a co-host or a panelist. And so you can control who is being able to speak at what time. That's where the one thing about virtual events is I think people are forgetting that there's a buffer of time for people to get on and for people to participate or engage, right? So anytime you can eliminate those questionable times by streamlining a process, I would take it. I spent about 2 or 3 days working with a client on their changing all of their data analytic training classes virtual. So they always did them in person, but once COVID hit, they couldn't do them in person anymore. So we worked through, Zoom has a really good whiteboard feature where you can have actual participation where people are writing on a whiteboard together. They have different kind of groups where you can group people out so they can have mini conversations privately without being in the full Zoom call with everybody. So I would just think about ways where you can streamline that experience and then make it easier on you as the technical person that maybe is running the call.
Very cool. Yeah, that's helpful. I didn't think of that.
All right, I don't think we have any more questions. So I just want to thank you, Lara, for hosting this webinar today. This was awesome, really helpful information. And thank you for sharing your contact info. If anyone didn't get it, you can always reach out to us at Project X-ITE and we can connect you with Lara. And thank you attendees for taking time out of your days to come visit with us. So please remember to check out our website, projectxite.org/explore for all of our upcoming workshops. This Friday, we are hosting another session called Work From Home, What the Heck? And if you have any questions, you can always reach out to us at projectxite.du.edu. Thank you all, be well and stay safe.